Good. So my name is Feliza, and tonight I'm going to be telling you a little bit about strong female characters. But before that, I'm going to introduce myself so you don't think that I'm just like totally full of it. I grew up in Toledo, and I graduated from UT a few years ago with a degree in communication. But now I live outside Philadelphia, and I'm currently doing a master's degree in publishing at Rosemont College. So in the extra time that I have where I'm not, doing school things and, getting a graduate degree, I write and edit a website called Girls in Capes, and I spend an awful lot of time thinking about female characters as role models and other ways that like geekiness and social justice kind of intersect. So Girls in Capes has a staff of 9 writers, which includes me, and we cover topics related to TV and film, comics and graphic novels, subculture, gaming, and books. Now, to the fun part, which is, I guess, why you're here. So tonight, I wanted to talk about how female protagonists are written in books, especially young adult books. There's been a lot of really popular young adult books in the past 10 years, from, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, which was in 2004, to the 2014 box office smash Divergent, which, has anyone seen Divergent, like the movie? Some of you? Okay. And YA is really full of heroes, too, from, the determined kind like Harry Potter to more like the warrior type like Percy Jackson. Now, one of the really, really wonderful things about YA is that it's one of the very few kinds of entertainment where there are just as many girls as there are boys. For all the Harrys and Percys in young adult, there are also Katnisses and Trisses. 2 of the series that I read when I was growing up, young adult books, called The Song of the Lioness and The Protector of the Small, followed protagonists who weren't just knights, medieval fantasy, they were also girls. In YA adventure stories, the adventures aren't limited to just being for boys, and you're just as likely to find a girl swinging a sword around as you are a boy. But there's something that bothers me just a little bit about that. If we only measure the strength of female characters by how well they can act like a boy, how is that any different from saying that only boys are cool characters? Now, don't get me wrong. I really love stories with female heroes that have swords. In The Song of the Lioness, there's a girl who's named Alana who pretends to be a boy so that she can be a knight, and that's really one of my favorite series ever. And I have a really, really long-standing love for Wonder Woman. Anybody Wonder Woman? Yeah? Yeah. But when I was 12, I stopped growing up, and it's really, really hard to keep pursuing your dream of being a 6-foot-tall Amazon princess when you're only 5'2". Doesn't work very well. Well, but I've really never been good at sports anyway. I've really never even been athletic. My best points were always collected in my head, so being creative and smart. And it seemed like any girl who was smart in a book was like a sidekick, like Hermione in Harry Potter. Or sometimes just like not important or interesting to the hero. And because that wasn't interesting to the hero, it's not interesting to the reader. Other books that I read in high school featured protagonists who were fallen in love with just kind of like because, or like, oh, it's destiny, but not because of their good points, It's like, oh, I just love you because. And admiring those sorts of protagonists was really impossible for me when I was in high school. So after finishing high school and college, and after I met more people and learned a lot more about the world, I discovered there are a lot of things that I value so much more than I did when I was in high school. And those are traits I aspire towards and admire when I see them in others. A lot of them are the traits that make characters of any kind, not just female characters, men too, making them really, really strong characters. Loyalty, kindness, dedication, and the will to overcome weaknesses. So tonight, we're going to be talking about strong female characters in 3 books. The School for Good and Evil by Saman Chainani, Born Wicked by Jessica Spotswood, and Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. In each of these books, characters fulfill at least one of these traits, usually more than one of these traits. Often girls who are loyal and big-hearted, who start their story wavering and unsure, only to grow in confidence and gain a strength that isn't physical. So how many of you are writers? lots of you, yay! That's great. So I hope that this is going to help you guys as you work on writing novels and female characters in your own work. Now I'm going to have some time for questions afterwards, after I wrap up with the presentation. So if there's anything that you want to know more about, just kind of hold your questions and I'll be more than happy to answer them at the end. But first I'm going to kind of go over each book so that you have a little bit of understanding of what I'm talking about. The School for Good and Evil is about two girls. A girl named Sophie, who's the most beautiful girl in the village of Gavaldon, and the really weird, slightly creepy girl that she befriended as an act of charity, whose name is Agatha. Every year, two children are kidnapped from the village to attend the School for Good and Evil to become, princes or villains, and princesses or witches, and Sophie thinks she is a perfect candidate for princess. The one on the right, the blonde one, that's Sophie.
I have a question. How did they go after each other's throat? One wants to be a witch and one wants to be a princess.
You'll find out. It wouldn't be much of a story, though, if Sophie and Agatha weren't the ones who got spirited away to the school, and soon the girls find themselves split up, as every pair of children gets split up. With one girl headed to the School for Good to become a princess, and the other headed to the School for Evil to become a witch. But it also wouldn't really be much of a story if everything went as expected, and instead of pretty blonde Sophie as a princess and dark dour Agatha as a witch, the girls are sent the opposite way, with Sophie taking classes like uglification and Agatha surrounded by nothing but very pretty, very boring classmates. But Agatha's in the School for Good for a reason. While Sophie can only think about how much she wants to be in the School for Good so she can become a beautiful princess, Agatha is consumed by her own desire to protect her best friend from harm and to take both of them back to their village where they can be safe. No matter how hard Agatha tries to help Sophie find her one true love so their fairy tale will end and they can go back home, Sophie's self-centeredness just keeps getting in the way, and it soon becomes obvious that while Agatha may look like a witch, her heart is definitely good. The second book, Born Wicked, is about another group of girls. The narrator, Kate Cahill, is a witch, and so are her two younger sisters. They live in a different version of America before 1900, a version where magic is very real, and so is witch hunting. Kate is really struggling to protect Maura and Tess from the aggressive anti-witch brotherhood, but Tess loves to try and fix things with clever little tiny magic tricks, and Maura is very, very rebellious. Kate knows that she has to make a choice as her birthday approaches, and she has to choose either to marry somebody, which, ew, or she needs to enter the Sisterhood, which is a group of nuns that follow the Brotherhood's orders. The discovery of her mother's diary, which ends in a deathbed letter to Kate, changes her priorities pretty dramatically, and she has two new problems on her plate. She has to find the godmother that the diary mentioned, who is condemned as a witch by the Brotherhood, and she has to learn more about the mysterious prophecy that her mother mentions about three sisters, all of them witches, and the strongest of them who could bring about a new age of power or a new era of witch hunting and destruction. The third book, Fangirl, is about a girl named Kath who's starting college. As college freshman goes, she's a little strange, but in a way a lot of readers can relate to. She's much more interested in writing fan fiction about her favorite series, Simon Snow, than she is in meeting new people or like going to the dining hall to eat food. She also expects her twin sister, Ren, to feel the same way, because Ren has always felt the same way and has always followed her wherever she would go. But Ren doesn't want to be roommates, and that leaves Kath to navigate college and adulthood alone. So first, we're going to talk about one thing that shows up in pretty much every book about a female character, which is whether or not the girl is pretty. How many of you guys can think of a book you've read where the girl thinks about whether or not she's pretty? Everybody? Almost everybody? Well, in all three of the books that we're talking about this evening, the protagonist has to think about whether or not she's pretty, and how that affects the choices that she makes, or in some cases, the choices she needs to make. For those of you who are girls, you're probably pretty familiar with that, because high school and college are really, really hard. And sometimes, in some ways, looking pretty can really smooth things out or make things easier, but as everybody probably knows by now, I would assume, being pretty doesn't automatically make you a good person, and it doesn't automatically mean you're smart. But each of these novels talks about how things look as opposed to how things actually are. The most obvious situation is the one in School for Good and Evil, where we learn that Sophie is really loved in her village because she's super pretty, and Agatha is feared and called a witch because of how she looks. You know, never mind that like Sophie's idea of doing a good deed is making hand lotion for orphans. Like, that doesn't seem very, useful. Or that Agatha's idea of finding somebody's one true love is about caring about their personality rather than how they look. For Sophie, her prettiness proves, at least in her brain, that she is good. Because, according to Sophie, only pretty girls can become princesses. When she meets her 3 roommates who are all witches in School for Evil, she screams at them, "Look at me and look at you." And when her roommate, and that doesn't really sound like someone who's very good to me. One of her roommates just kind of looks at her and says, "Told you she was a villain." The characters of the book are very, very strict about how a person's appearance reflects their inner good or evil, which is why Sophie's in a class called Uglification, and Agatha is in a class called Beautification. In the School for Good and Evil, though, the way a person looks completely affects the way that person is treated. At the School for Good, Agatha works really hard to make sure that she makes high marks in all of her classes. She studies hard, she does well in almost all of the tests, she learns all of the good spells, she shows kindness to the wolves and fairies, even though the wolves are evil and most of the other students in Good are only kind to the fairies. But despite how good Agatha's actions are, her loyalty to Sophie and her kindness and how hard she works, everyone around her still sees her as a witch and labels her definitely evil. Here's an example. But there's something a little bit similar in Fangirl, the way that Kath is treated. Though Kath and Ren are identical twins, Ren is the pretty twin. And because Kath thinks of her sister as being the pretty one, she lacks the motivation to make attempts at things like, making friends or going on dates, even though these things would probably actually make her really happy. Her appearance also causes the people around her to treat her in a different way. Now the third girl, though, Kate Cahill, she has very different experiences. She also thinks of herself as the less pretty Cahill, because Maura, in her opinion, and basically everybody else's, is the one who's pretty. But for Kate, that's not really something that's bad for her self-esteem or hampers her ability to interact with other people the way it does with Agatha and Kath. Since she really only has 2 options for her future, marrying somebody or becoming a nun, being less pretty has a very real impact on whether or not she can find someone to marry her before the Brotherhood marries her off to some old guy, which would be a very unpleasant ending for her. But to Kate's credit, being less pretty than Maura really doesn't seem to bother her throughout the course of the book. So, what does bother her? When members of the Brotherhood start asking questions, when she goes to visit a very suspicious bookshop, she pretends to be very simple and, "Oh, I'm just doing something for my dad." And one of the brothers smiles at her and tells her that everyone in town knows she's not the clever sort. I mean, that would bother me. The girl's father is a scholar, and although Kate's not really as bookish as her 2 younger sisters, or nearly as much of a genius as her youngest sister Tess, she was really raised with a love of reading and a curiosity for the world around her. What hurts her feelings isn't about how she looks, but about others treating her as though she's not intelligent enough, especially when the biggest reason the brothers think that she's not clever is because she happens to be a girl. One very interesting thing about Born Wicked, or the world of Born Wicked, is that Kate's power is acknowledged as being part of her mind and not part of her body. Mother taught us that a witch's power is all in your mind, Kate says in the very first chapter of the book. We can't change matter, only how people see things, and in very rare cases, how they remember them. Throughout the book, she explains that magic is really just about changing people's perceptions. At one point, Tess takes a really horribly cooked dinner that just tastes really gross and makes everybody think that it actually tastes very good. And Kate herself has the very rare and very dangerous ability to alter people's memories. There are many kinds of power that are all in a person's mind. Intelligence, compassion, loyalty, dedication, and willpower. Kate's acknowledgement that these are important to her indicates her strength as a character, especially in the fantasy genre, where the most important thing is nearly always the strength of a character's magic or the strength to swing a sword. So next, let's talk about a theme that you'll find in nearly any story that features female characters, the relationship between sisters. I mean, this isn't exactly featured prominently in popular adventure stories that feature boys, kind of for obvious reasons, but if you think about the two most popular movies last year, The Hunger Games begins when Katniss sacrifices herself for the games in the place of her younger sister Prim. And one of the most important relationships she has in the first book is with Rue, who reminds her of her sister. Frozen is a movie that's 100% about a pair of sisters and their love for each other, with Elsa afraid that she'll hurt Anna, and Anna convinced that her sister isn't bad, only scared. Likewise, sisterhood is usually an important theme in books featuring well-written female characters, like in the novel Fangirl. In fact, the first struggle of Fangirl's protagonist is with her twin sister. Aside from what I mentioned earlier, that Ren cares more about her appearance and is more appealing to other people because of it, Kat struggles with the changing relationship she has with her twin as they grow out of childhood and into adulthood. At the beginning of the story, Kat says that having a twin sister is like having a built-in best friend, remembering how inseparable the girls were in their early life. Before college, Ren did everything that Kat did, and the girls took care of one another, which was even more important after their mother left them when they were in 3rd grade. Their closeness makes Ren's abandonment even more painful, and it only gets worse when Ren reconnects with their estranged mother in the middle of the story. I have a sister of my own, and we're very close in age, and I can't remember being an only child. Like Kath, I did everything with my sister, and like Kath, starting college was like culture shock when my 1-year younger sister couldn't come with me. Fangirl represents a certain narrative of sisterhood, one about a pair of sisters who share everything, only as girls, only to separate as women. When middle school-aged Kath didn't get invited to birthdays or sleepovers, Ren made sure that she got to join in. When college freshman Ren sends Kath a 911, Kath immediately rushes to her. Even though Ren feels trapped in her relationship with her twin, Kath starts to be just as protective of her as an adult as her sister was when they were children. There are several kinds of sisterhood narratives. So, your typical sisters as best friends to sisters as mortal enemies. You could even say that Agatha and Sophie have their own sisterhood narrative. They come from the same town, they do mostly everything together, and Agatha's very protective of Sophie the way that an older sister is, whereas Sophie, knowing that her older sister figure will come hang out with her and help her at any time, just kind of does whatever she feels like. But the most important factor in Kate's adventure, and in her entire characterization, is her relationships with Mara and Tess, which are extremely different relationships that developed differently because of each girl's personality. Through the book, we see both through the events of the novel and through flashbacks that her relationship with 13-year-old Tess is characterized largely by how clever and kind Tess is. At one point, Kate says, "That's one way that Tess is a much better person than I am." while her relationship with Mara is a lot more stormy. Since Kate serves as a stand-in mother for her two younger sisters, it's really clear how her relationship with Mara is somehow strained. Kate's first experience with magic happens when she experiences frustration with Mara's meanness. And throughout the book, Mara challenges Kate's authority as the oldest daughter and lady of the house, making very risky choices about when she's going to perform magic and who she's going to tell about their powers. A lot of Kate's growth after their mother's death meant moving away from being a sister and towards being a mother. Mara complains that Kate never listens to her or pays attention to her, and Kate realizes, partway through the book, that she treats Tess like a little kid rather than the intelligent young lady that she's becoming. During Born Wicked, she returns to her sister role, realizing that her sisters are old enough and smart enough to care for themselves. This is another sisterhood narrative, one normally found in stories about orphans. The oldest first thinking the younger siblings are helpless children, only to discover that they've grown up too. Kate learns later on that she and her sisters are subject to a prophecy in which one of the three sisters, an incredibly powerful witch, will bring prosperity or destruction to the witches of America. But of the three sisters, only two will make it into the 20th century because one is going to kill the other. It's a very startling development, especially as Kate spent most of her life trying to save both of her sisters from, dying. So throughout Born Wicked, she begins a journey to learn more about the prophecy and find out if she's the witch that the prophecy speaks of. Kate suspects that she's the powerful witch from the prophecy, and Mara's growing dissatisfaction, spreading through her like an itch she can't quite scratch, leads Kate to believe Mara will try to kill her. Here the narrative shifts. Gone is the narrative of the overprotective older sister, and now it's a story about resentment and competition, evolving into something darker and nastier, and a sister who will protect the others at any cost. Because though Kate believes Mara may be the killer in the prophecy, Kate will still do anything in the world to make sure that Mara is never suspected of being a witch, even if it means that she's only going to hate her more. Family relationships are key points of development for most people, and relationships between siblings can dramatically alter each sibling involved. Fangirl and Born Wicked not only recognize these relationships, but build on their importance. And readers with siblings of their own will recognize themselves in Kath and Kate in a way that feels very, very real. But beyond prettiness, beyond sisterhood, there's something else that's important for characters to be really well-rounded and interesting. Characters don't become strong just by depending on their relationships to other characters, whether that means their love interest, their best friend, or their sister. Characters also have to develop their own sense of self as an individual, one whose identity isn't tied to another's, to really become a strong character. It's not always easy to pull off. The School for Good and Evil is a story about friendship. In any ordinary fairy tale, the story is about a princess and a prince, usually a princess who needs saving and a prince who does the saving. But even if Agatha's a princess in the School for Good, the School for Good and Evil isn't about Agatha and her prince. The story belongs to Agatha and Sophie. A little more than halfway through the story, the differences between the girls grow clearer as their development reaches a high point in the story. During the trial, Sophie promises to team up with the prince from the School for Good she's been trying to kiss, the prince she believes is her true love. But her poor magic skills and the fact that everybody wants to kill her leaves her almost helpless and depending on Agatha to help her. Agatha transforms them both into plants so that they can hide from the other students, but then Sophie's prince is attacked right in front of them. Sophie won't turn back into a human to help him, so Agatha does what she needs to do, one of the 4 basic rules of good: protect. But the fact that Sophie didn't save him when she promised that she would team up with him makes him very, very angry. Sophie tries to protest that no princess would ever risk her own life, but he only asks her, then why did she? Here, the reader sees that Agatha isn't evil or a witch, and that she's not a regular princess either. By this point in the story, Agatha's character development isn't about her friendship with Sophie anymore. She's grown enough confidence that she doesn't need to focus only on Sophie, and she's got so much good in her that she doesn't think about being a princess and being saved. Her greatest value is her compassion, and her compassion won't let her stand aside as someone gets hurt in front of her. Her compassion isn't limited only to the humans either. She cares very deeply about her former students, those who didn't graduate from the School for Good and Evil, who are the ones transformed into the fairies and wolves. In other cases, it's just a lot easier to pull off. Fangirl is a story about Kath developing a personality and a personhood completely separate from Ren. Unlike Agatha's journey, which is in many ways about how she's equal and opposite of Sophie, Kath's journey is about disentangling herself from Ren and growing into a woman who is confident, capable, and able to stand on her own. Fangirl is about a girl becoming a woman, but it's also about how she has to become a woman on her own before she can repair her relationship with her sister. Kate's adventure in Born Wicked is less about her distance from her sisters as it is her graduation from isolation into a community. As she learns more about the prophecy and her godmother, she discovers more and more witches, after thinking she and her sisters were alone. It's only with the help of this larger community that she can grow as a young woman. It may seem counterintuitive, but Kate discovers that it's difficult to develop as an individual into a woman without having other women around as role models. And that is the reason it's so important to have well-developed and diverse female protagonists in young adult novels. Individual development is one of the most important parts of growing from girlhood to womanhood because, in the end, no one can really make decisions for someone who's an adult, and self-discovery has to come from yourself. In stories like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, the boys grow into men through the lessons they have to learn as part of their adventures. But it's much more rare in young adult books to watch girls grow into women quite the same way. Each of these three stories, though, showcases a girl who is growing out of being a child, and all of them are becoming a different sort of young woman. There are many forms of strength for a hero of a novel. Physical strength, mental strength, emotional strength, and so on. And it's just not interesting for the hero to possess all of them. A journey can only really be interesting if the hero can overcome some sort of difficulty. And one of the most interesting difficulties is that with the hero's own weaknesses. Kath, Kate, and Agatha all overcome their own weaknesses through the course of their own stories. Kath starts Fangirl dependent on her twin sister and reluctant to make any attempt at going outside of her comfort zone. Kate begins Born Wicked overwhelmed by her responsibilities and feeling that she can't control or save her sisters. Agatha starts the School for Good and Evil believing that she must absolutely be evil because there's nothing good about her. Through these stories, each girl grows until she overcomes at least part of her problem. Kath gains her independence and finds her own place, and finally able to have confidence in herself and her abilities as a writer. Kate's magic blooms, and her relationship with Tess shifts from almost motherly to one of equals. Agatha discovers her heart is truly good, and that the good in her far exceeds the creepiness of her physical appearance. The true measure of character is in overcoming difficulties, and these three young women are very, very good examples of characters who use mental and emotional strength to defeat the things that stand in their way. I recommend these three books to any reader looking for a different sort of strong female character. So I'll open the floor for questions. Yes?
Why did you select these three books over others?
A lot of other young adult books feature female characters who use physical strength. For example, The Hunger Games is one that usually comes up in discussions of strong female characters, but the only reason that people like Katniss is because she behaves like a boy, not because she behaves like a girl. The first time that I started to really think about this was an interview with Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa Stark in A Game of Thrones. And she said, everybody hates Sansa, and I think she's the smartest character on the show because she does what she needs to survive. But everyone likes Arya because she acts like a boy. So I wanted to talk about characters from young adult books who are girly and feminine, but are still interesting characters who are intelligent and strong. Yes?
Are those anime or movies?
Actually, The School for Good and Evil is going to be a movie. I think it's coming out in a couple of years. It's kind of very early on in development.
Looking at anything else?
I'm sorry?
Fangirl, the other one?
No. Well, the other two are very, very recent, so I'm not sure if they have movies on the way as well.
I have a question. How would you make a character have a story if its power is so strong it just can counter almost everything?
Well, that's kind of not a terribly interesting story, is it?
True, but you guys have whole background. That would be interesting. Just watch him play with his enemies.
I thought I saw another question in the back.
Why? Okay, allow me to elaborate on this question. Why would it be important for girls to only have positive role models instead of potentially seeing negative role models or humans who, while being fully fleshed out, having dichotomies in how they think, but expressing negative traits? Why would it be more important to have positive role models instead of negative role models that they could see and then know what not to be?
Do you have an example of a negative role model?
For negative role model, actually, I feel like that'd be more common in male-centered fiction, just basically because it'd be highly criticized to write just a straight-out flat villain who is female. But in that, I'm trying to think of a very good example here. If you just want to look at basic superheroes, like Superman versus Brainiac. Brainiac's evil and wants to control people, so you'll have kids who look at that and say, oh, Superman's trying to make sure people can control their own choices. Obviously, I should want to control my own choices and not try and lord over others. So, with that, how do you feel about that?
I would say that yes, it would be important to have female villains as well. But there's quite a disproportionate number of male heroes to female heroes. There's not enough variety of female heroes to really have enough. There's just not enough. If you think about how many female-led superhero movies can you think of off the top of your head?
Centered solely on females,
Yes.
not including any in groups.
Yes.
I can't see. I can't think of any that feature one explicitly. I can think of several that feature one over the entire course of the story.
How many featuring a male character can you think of? Only a male character.
A whole lot, but I don't see why.
How many?
I don't see
How
why
many?
females can't look at male characters and also get the same benefits out of it as somehow.
Why can't male readers look at female characters the same way? Yes?
I have an interesting thought. Are female anti-heroes more common than female heroes?
Anti-heroes?
Yeah, female anti-heroes versus female heroes.
I'm not quite sure. I can't think of any female anti-heroes. Can anyone else think of any?
Ash.
Yeah.
Maleficent?
Maleficent's a very good idea. Maleficent is a very good example of a female villain who is a really good example of what not to do. She just storms into a castle and is like, that baby's gonna die, and then she leaves. So.